I'm Brianna Zinke, and for my final mobile project, I made an Android game. So my topic area was Android game development, and for my game, I decided to create kind of a retro-styled game inspired by the arcade game Q*bert. So in that game, it has an interesting map and movement layout where up, down, left, and right kind of moves you through the isometric pyramid in kind of a unique way, so it makes movement a little more difficult. And for the enemies in my game, I have meteors that just go through the columns to hit the player. And the game objective is to land on every square to flip the color. So once you color every single and land on every single square in the map, it'll move you to the next level and reset the map. And in each level progression, the meteor enemies will become a lot faster and spawn a lot more frequently, so the difficulty increases, and you lose when your lives reach 0, so when you collide with a meteor or if you jump off the map and go out of bounds, then you'll lose a life. And for the statistics, I measure the score and the level the player makes it to, and I also save the date of the game. So the way I implemented my game was it has two main parts. So for the actual game itself, this screen that you see on the right here, I used Unity for that for mobile development. So I used Unity in C# for the scripting. So that's how I created this game. That's part of the app. And then for the other main part, I used Android Studio to make the other screens. So as we'll see here are the screens of my Android Studio app. So we have this main screen that you start at. This is the statistics page that scores a global leaderboard and your personal game history, and then the create account and login page. And for the Android Studio app, the way I have it working is when you press start, it'll launch the Unity app game. And then for statistics and account handling, I implemented Firebase authentication and Firestore in both my Unity and Android Studio app. So for setup requirements, if you were to follow along and make this yourself, you're going to want to get Unity Hub, and I used Unity 6. So once you get Unity Hub, it'll let you create a project and choose the installation you want for the Unity editor. And another useful resource is the Unity Remote 5 Android app. It's not necessary, but it makes it a lot easier during mobile Unity development, since you can just plug in your phone, and without having to wait for the app to build, you can just run it in the editor. And then I also use VS Code for the C# development for scripting in Unity, and that will just it'll install it for you with the Unity editor. And I used Android Studio Ladybug, and I also had Firebase set up through Google. So I'll show you a demo by running my app through Android Studio and showing the Android Studio emulator screen. Alright, so here's my actual app and game demo. So I have the Android Studio app that I just opened, downloaded to my phone, built to my phone. So this is the main screen that you're welcomed by. You're started as a guest, and you can hit the login page to log in. So let's create a new account. I have a sign up page. We'll do new@gmail.com. Set a random password for that, and we'll create the account. So now you see our name up at the top, welcome Bree, and then we have the stats page, which we can check out. So there's a global leaderboard for the top 10, and then since I just made this account, there's no personal stats yet. So that leaderboard shows the top 10 scores. We'll return. Still logged in as Bree, and then we can start the game, which launches the Unity app just to start. So that'll open up here. So here's the actual game we have started. There is volume, which is not being played through the emulator. So I have the volume connected to my phone, which hopefully you can hear now. So we can just swipe to move. There's left, right, up, and down. The objective of the game is to hit every square to color it, and then you move on to the next level and avoid getting hit by the asteroids. So I have animations for the explosions and collisions. And the meteors start as pretty slow, but as you progress each level, they spawn more, they become a lot faster. So we can jump off the map too, and that kills you too, so that's another challenge. We have the lives heart shown there. So you can just keep playing. Alright, and then to actually end the game and send it to Firebase, you have to lose, so I'll just make my player lose here. So there we got a game over, and then it'll restart the game for you. And you can also just back to the previous screen. Alright, so here's the Android Studio part of the app again. And so I'm still logged into the same account. We just played that game, and we can see now it's added to our personal stats, and it's also added to the global leaderboard there. So that all worked from Firebase and added to the correct account. And then sign out, and boom, there you go, asks you to log in again. There's also stats for guest too. So guest has personal stats, it's just the default account it starts you in. Logging in really quickly since I didn't show that. So we just made that new email, new@gmail.com. Put the password we typed in, and if you do it incorrectly, it just doesn't work. Sign in there. Welcome Bree again, it says at the top. And there we go, there's our personal stats. So we can sign out again, back to guest. So for step-by-step coding instructions, first I'll start with Unity. I'll show you how to import game assets, create a scene, handle the scripts with C#, and different features such as animation, the moving background, and the Firebase connection. So here is my Unity. I have the editor open. So for Unity setup, what you're going to want to do is download Unity Hub. The version I have should be the most recent one, 3.10. And then in Unity Hub, it'll have you download an editor, and then you can create your projects here. So it's pretty simple. It'll just ask you if you want to follow a template. I'm just doing a 3D or 2D project for mine and 2D mobile, and it'll just handle all that setup there. And then once you have that set up and you open the project, it'll open in your editor, and there are a few very important settings that I would recommend going through first. So you want to go to build profile and firstly switch the platform. The default is Windows, switch it to Android, so you can just click switch platform. And once you need to export it as a library for the integration, once you're done, you can just click export project and export it to a file. But for now, I just built it on my phone directly because I couldn't get the Unity as a library to work perfectly. So I'm just exporting it to my phone directly. And once you're building it, you need to plug your phone in with a USB so it actually builds to your phone. And it'll also take very long to build. Mine took around almost 20 minutes, I think, on the initial build, because it's just handling so many different things. But in the Unity editor, there's so many different features and possibilities for your game. So mine is a pretty simple one. The first thing I would recommend doing, I have assets here, and I created a folder for sprites and for scripts. So I just went through and found all my sprites first and kind of planned out what I wanted my game to look like. So you can go through multiple different sites. You can just Google free game assets and find those. So there's opengameart.org or itch.io. I have audio, I have all the animations and sprites, the different backgrounds. And then once you find all your sprites, you can just drag them in to the scene, and it'll just create it for you. So with the sprites, when you drag them in, it'll create your animation for you, and it'll just add them to the scene. So my scene's already, so I'm not going to add anything else. But once you just drag them in, you can move everything around. Like with these tools, you can move everything around, resize it, make sure everything's centered in the camera, and make sure the camera is positioned the right way. And I would recommend setting the Z position to everything to 0, so it's all shown in the camera. And once you have that all set up, you can position everything properly. And after that, the main thing is just setting up the scripts so you can actually get your game to run and do things. So I have a scripts folder in my assets that I made, here are all my scripts. I have player, I have the game controller, Firebase manager, and then the map cube properties that hold the steps on the cubes. I have the lives manager for the UI objects. So when you're adding a new object to your scene, also, you can create an empty object just to hold scripts. That's what I did for my game controller. Or there's also Text Mesh Pro that I used for my UI, so you can bring in that package. You can add buttons, text, and I just dragged in the icons for the hearts and the cube. And in these objects themselves, you can add components and then add the scripts to them directly. And you can also add animators to them from what you just drag in. So one of the key things is the player and enemy and game controller in my game. So for the player, I just dragged it in from an asset like I showed. And I created a player script. And one of the most important things for my game for the collision detection, you want to add colliders. So I added a box collider to my player, and then I have an enemy here, which is an asteroid. I dragged it off screen because I have a script that actually spawns it in position. But for now, you just drag it out of the scene so it's not viewed. And you want to add a collider to the enemy as well and check is trigger only on one of them. So I made my enemy the trigger. And then on player that gets triggered, you want to add a rigid body and disable gravity so it doesn't just fall. So that's how you can set up collision, and then you can handle it in the scripts. So here I have my player script. It's a mono behavior one. To make the scripts, you can just create new mono behavior script. And this is C#. I'm using Visual Studio Code. It also comes automatically downloaded. When you download the Unity editor, it'll download Visual Studio Code for you as well if you want. And what I did here is I first set up all the variables for the players, so lives, dead flag, its renderers, since each sprite object should have a renderer on it, which you can use to flip the sprite around or make it visible, invisible, all that. So I set up the sprite renderers, the animator, just all of these variables, positions, my audio clips. And then I have, there's three main important functions for the Unity objects. So there's awake, which happens when the item is brought in. There's start, which happens when the game starts. And then there's update. So in start, I just initialize all my different variables, the positions, I get the components to set everything up. And then in update, that's your game loop that just continuously runs. Depending on your time scale, you can affect how frequently the update loop runs. So I just have it on default. I'm not exactly sure how many times it runs per second. But this will just constantly run and scan. So I have it checking for screen swipes. I have it handling the animation by setting the animator flags. And so it handles the movement as well. Here's my movement function. And then here is the function for handling collisions. You want to use on trigger, enter 2D or 3D for whatever you're using. Then a collider, I have a 2D collider. It checks if the object that hit it, this has to be the exact name as you have it named in the scene, so it checks for that and then handles that. And I have all my other functions just to handle the player, like respawning it, spawning the explosion animation, starting it at the start cube, getting the position it's at, and then moving it as well. For each cube, map cube, I dragged it in the scene, and then I have a script that finds the position where it's at, so then I have it named as well, so it just goes through when you move for the row and column. Checks if you're out of bounds. So I have all these game functions set up. And then my other main script is my game controller. So one important thing to note that caused me a lot of errors before when I was trying to build was you don't want to have a loop of different scripts like initializing each other. Like I had a player have an instance of game controller, and then I had game controller have an instance of player, but they both depended on each other when I did that. When one was not initialized, it was trying to use the one that wasn't initialized, so that broke everything. So I changed it, so now I only have one game controller that has one player, so it's just a direct connection instead of a loop. And my game controller also handles so many other things. It has the statistics things like the level and score, the flags for game one, game ending, the map cubes, the enemy and the enemy handlers, and the audio clips as well. And then I also have my game controller set up to handle Firebase, so when a game ends, sends that score and level to Firebase. So I have the start function that just initializes all those objects. I have update. This function is important if you want the build on your phone to be able to use the back arrow to back out. Otherwise, you can't back out unless you go to home or like force close it. So I set up this function. And then in my update, it's just checking to update the cube scores when the player steps on a cube. It's checking if the game is won or lost. It's updating the timer, spawning the enemies and the sound clips. Then I have all these game functions again, just to update the cubes, set the map, start a new level, restart when the user loses, update game difficulty since each level gets harder by having the enemies spawn more frequently and become faster. I have the functions to show the game one screen and game end screen, so that would be these. I have it. You can just set an object and there's functions to enable and disable it, so just enables and disables, and there's game one as well, enable, disable. And I have coroutines that wait a few seconds before it starts the new level, so you can make it kind of pause and wait if you use coroutines and use wait for seconds. So you'll return wait for new seconds in IEnumerator. And then these old functions, this is what you would want to use if you get the Unity as a library working for Android. Right now, I just built it directly to my phone and launched it as like another app. But because there were too many bugs with using Unity as a library, and those bugs were just on Unity's end. But that's what you could use if you get that working. I have the functions to end the game, spawn the enemy, move the enemy. So there are all my game functions. And I have scripts as well for the UI elements to update those. I have a Firebase manager empty object with the Firebase script to handle that. So that's the basic game setup. And then there's also a few more very important settings that you need to modify. So you go to project settings and player, since that's what your game uses when building, that's the default. So you want to customize the company name, product name, and remember what this is because that's important for your package name so you can launch it from Android Studio. And the main settings you would want to change scripting backend to IL2 CPP. Make sure the API level is the same between both. And for the movement system, I'm just using the old one. So where is that at? You could also select game activity or activity. I'm using the old input handling for the swipes. I just thought it was easier. So those are the main settings you need to modify here. You also want to enable ARM64. You don't need ARM v7. That just makes the build take longer if you have both enabled. Make sure ARM64 is enabled. So those are the important settings there. And now we have everything set up so we can actually play it in the editor when we're ready. So one thing I recommend is downloading Android Remote 5 on your phone because then you can run the editor from your phone. Since when I'm running at my desktop, I obviously can't swipe, so I can't move my player at all. But if you get that app to connect it to your phone, you can swipe on your phone and see it in the editor. So I have sound bites playing as well. And you can see in the console all of the problems. I have a bunch of debug statements printing. There we go. Player died. Respawns there. So I can't play on the editor right now because I don't have my phone hooked up. But yes, that's how you see it in the editor. That. So one more useful thing to see is once you build it to your phone, it'll open the logcat and open on your phone. So this is what you can use for debugging and just handling it while it plays. I'll also show you how to implement the app through Android Studio. So I'll show you how to set up the Jetpack Compose, navigation and the different screen setup, how I set up Firebase and the auth view model functions, and then how to use an intent for launching the Unity app. Here's my Android Studio part of the app. So I use Jetpack Compose for it, and it's a lot like kind of what we've done in class for the 1024 game. So I have my main app here, and here I'm in main activity. So I have a main activity class, and I have all my different composables. So the main composable for the main screen, where I track the login state variable, context to fetch the username that I display on the top, and just all the columns, the buttons, labels, all of that's kind of the same thing that we've done, and you can look at the Jetpack Compose documentation for. And I have the statistics screen, kind of the same thing, another composable. I have the login screen composable function, and that one's just another basic one with the boxes and columns and the text field inputs. And for authentication, I just have a login state variable that I switch around. And then I have the create account screen, name, email, password, and it also has that login state tracked from the auth view model. So the only view model my Android one uses is this auth view model, since all of the game logic is done in the Unity part. So there's no game related stuff in this part of my project, except for just showing the leaderboard and statistics and such. So in my auth view model, I connect it to Firestore, and I have the login functions, the sign up functions, and the functions to read from Firestore for the username, add the user's new game when they create an account, and set them as logged in. So one thing I did for Firestore, since I had to connect Unity and my Android app separately, or Unity and my Android Studio app separately to Firestore, and I wasn't able to get data passing between them to fully work. I just added a flag in Firestore for is logged in for each account, so I know which account's logged in on the Unity end. And I just have these functions to get the leaderboard, get the game statistics, and so the main thing that's different from what we did in class is the intent to launch the other app. So I had these debug statements here using Toast just to pop up on the screen, but I removed them now since I didn't need to see them. But so I declared an activity result launcher with an intent, and I have the launcher registered here. And then I have this function for launch other app that will launch the Unity game. So this package name is very important, and so is this part, so it knows exactly which app on your phone. You can find what this is set as in your Unity like I showed earlier. And if your app was checked as just an activity and not a game activity, you could just remove game there. And I have the flag set for the Unity. And yeah, so that's how I launch it with the intent. It launches the new game. To go back, you just have to press the back arrow on your phone, and it'll lead you back to the main screen of this app. And another thing I did was I added a custom font. So I just went on Google Fonts, and in the resource folder, let's see if I can find it. In the resource folder, I made a font folder. I dragged in the TTF and made an XML for it. And then you can see that I can declare it here as a font family, declared a font family for it, and then assigned it there, Pixel font family. And I also added a custom background by adding in Drawable the custom background and then using Painter resource to declare it. Very easy. And then I have app navigation too, which is also very similar to what we have done in class. Main is the landing page, the starting screen, and then there's all the others that you can travel to, and to go back to main from the others, you just pop the back stack. So let's see. The statistics screen, there should be a return button. Yep, return just pops the back stack to go back. So pretty simple. And then also in my Android Studio, I have the Unity project in this directory as well that I imported in. I wasn't able to get it working as a library since there were way too many bugs with the Gradle files and such. But if you do get it working, there's a bunch of documentation on how to do it. Hopefully, in newer versions, they make it easier to do and fix some of those bugs. So normally you would be able to just replace the launcher with your app part and then just run the Unity library part to launch the game. So it could just be like another activity that you could still launch with an intent. But for now, I just have it in this directory in this app level. So there are actually a lot of different ways to implement what I tried to achieve. There were many bugs when I was trying to implement the Unity and Android Studio integration. So honestly, the majority of my development time was spent troubleshooting and trying to fix different bugs and find different workarounds. The main bug was getting, because I initially wanted to use Unity as a library for my Android Studio app, so I could just do it all in Android Studio in once and launch it as a different activity in the same project. But I was not able to get that to work because the Gradle just kept messing up, and a lot of the documentation online was a little bit older, so it wasn't fully up to date. So there were some bugs on Unity's end and the Android Studio end that just made that really difficult to do. So what I ended up doing instead was just building the Unity app directly to my phone, building the Android Studio app directly to my phone, and then using an intent just to launch the Unity app from my Android Studio app. So instead of all packaged together in one project, they kind of have those two separate parts. But if the bugs are able to be fixed or different workarounds are published, you could definitely use Unity as a library directly integrated into your Android app. There's a lot of documentation about it because Unity now you can build it with a Unity library part and a launcher part and import that to Android Studio and launch it that way. It was just hard to add my own custom activity to that. And if you're able to do that, that'd make it a lot easier to pass data between them with intents. So you can send data and messages forward to the Unity app and backwards from the Unity app. So that would make something like the statistics a lot easier to implement. I ended up having to implement Firebase in both parts, both through Unity and C Sharp and Android Studio with my Kotlin and Jetpack Compose part. So both of those had a Firebase hookup. That's how I sent data in between them just to communicate those statistics and the account. Another thing I also tried was saving data to a file to read so I could communicate data between the two apps. But that was also causing a lot of issues with permissions as well, so I decided just connecting both to Firestore was an easier way to do it. And here I have my GitHub repository. So I have it all set up here with my README and assets credit. And in Unity project are my Unity files. And I have my app with the Jetpack Compose. So it cannot be instantly built if you pull from my GitHub repository because it's those two different parts. You have to build the Unity project separately from the Android Studio. But you can build the Android Studio and run it on its own. You just can't, that start button just won't work to launch the Unity game if you don't build both separately. And then I'll show my Firebase setup really quickly as well. So I have authentication here. I just have these two different users with the UID. And then I have Firestore here with these two users. I have an is logged in flag. There's guest for the default user. It's loading. So here we go. Here's my different users. There's guest with a bunch of different statistics from me messing around without being logged in and playing the game. I have this user and these game histories. So in my development, the main resources and documentation I used was the Unity development documentation and guide. There are also plenty of different tutorials on YouTube for just a very, very basic game in Unity, just so you know how to get started with setting up the scene, adding scripts and such. And then what I studied and took the longest was that Unity and Android Studio integration tutorial. So how you can integrate Unity as a library in a native Android app. And since I wasn't able to get that to fully work, I studied intents for sending the user to another app, so you can study that. And then I also have the documentation here for Firebase and Android Studio to set it up in Unity and Android Studio. And then I have the documentation for Android Studio, Jetpack Compose, and Kotlin for setting up those screens and those composables and the view model structure and such. And then the assets credit is shown in my GitHub repositories README. So that is my app. Thank you for watching.